So what we're going to talk about today is history. And that may not be a surprise to you. After all, if I said we're going to talk about chemistry today, that might be a surprise. But what in particular about history is, what is history? We are going to spend the whole semester talking about history, but none of that's going to make sense unless we fully understand what is history. And so before we actually begin with me telling you what I think history is, let me get an idea from you. What do you think history is? And don't say boring. What is history? It's an easy question. What'd you say? I heard it. What'd you say? The past. See, I told you it was an easy question. What is history? It's the past. So how many people agree that everything in the past is history? Okay, so let me give you an example. Yesterday I tied my shoes. That's in the past, right? Is that history? He says no. Why not?
It's not far back enough.
It's not far back enough. So history only counts if I tied my shoes 50 years ago, which by the way I did.
Okay,
It's
probably
not
not.
an important event, so that's important.
You're saying it's not important that I tied my
It's
shoes?
not as important as like the Constitution of America or something.
Okay, so would you rather us add important facts that things that happened in the past? Would that be a little bit better than just everything that happened in the past? Do you kind of agree with that? So if, for example, we were to study absolutely everything that happened in the past, that's pretty daunting, right? Even in this class where we just start at 1877 to the present, that's a lot of stuff. And I think that's the mistake a lot of students make. They think history is everything that happened in the past. Well, it's not. So important things that happened in the past, that's still a little broad, like important to who? Right? My shoe experience was important to me, but it still didn't make the history textbooks. Important to who?
Guess it depends on the teacher.
Depends on the teacher. Very good. Depends on the teacher. What makes an event important and another one not important? Let me reword that question.
How it alters the future.
What's your name?
Jeremiah.
Jeremiah says it's how, oops, are you in the witness protection?
No.
Okay. Jeremiah says it's if it alters the future, if it has some effect on society, then it's important enough to make the history books. You guys agree with that? And so therefore, I think we can all agree that my tying my shoes did not change the course of history whatsoever. And that definitely limits what we study in history, if it's just something that has had some effect on society. And so here's a good dictionary definition. Now there's lots. You can look up this on your own time if you'd like. But this is my favorite definition of history. It's a diachronic analysis of causality using documents and other items. Well, we're going to dissect that definition because that is, although it is the shortest definition I could find, it is so rich in what it's saying that it's worth looking at carefully. So the first thing you're going to notice in that is that diachronic is not a word you use normally. Diachronic basically means through time. And that's logical because history has a chronology about it, right? This happened and then that happened and then this happened. But does it say a diachronic list of events that happened in the past? Look at the definition. No. It's a diachronic what? Analysis. It's a diachronic analysis, not a diachronic list of events. So tell me, what is an analysis? You have your little smart machines in front of you. Look it up if you don't know the word. What does it mean when I say an analysis? Study, breaking down. If anyone wants to form a study group, I think we've got our study group leader right here. It's breaking down of something or an explanation, right? Does that make sense? So it's a diachronic, let's use the word explanation, of a list of events. No, we still don't have our list of everything that happened in the past yet, do we? It's a diachronic analysis of what? Causality. What does that mean? I know you know the answer, but I'm sure someone else in this room does. Help him out, you guys. Causality, what does it mean? The relationship between cause and effect. Very good. I don't know who said that, but good. The relationship between what caused an event to happen. Not all events. And that's it. That's what history is. It's an explanation of what caused something to happen. Not a list. And actually, now when you get into it that way, history might be a little more interesting, and we might not jump to the conclusion that history is boring. Let me give you an example, and you tell me if it's history or not. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th. History. Everyone agrees. Raise your hand if you think it's history. Wrong. Sorry. Set you up for that one. How about if I stood up here and explained to you why Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th? Is that one history? That's the one that's history. The other is just a fact. Right? I didn't offer any explanation, but I can tell you why it happened. Now, which is more interesting, memorizing that it happened or understanding why it happened? That's what makes people think history is boring, because all they do is memorize a bunch of lists of events. This person, that treaty, that president, that war, without really understanding the why behind it. And so if you understand that history is a diachronic analysis, or an explanation of things that happen through time, and understanding what caused those events, it makes it a little bit more interesting. Agree? Okay, so the second part of this definition that I like is it also tells us where we get history from. History doesn't just fall from the sky. It comes from somewhere. And this definition actually tells us where. And it's from documents and other items. Thank you. Yes, I mean, that was another easy question. You're really hoping that all the questions in this class are that easy. History comes from documents and other items. So let's look at what kind of documents. There we go. Let's look at the type of documents we use to get history from. For example, we look at letters. And when I say we, I mean historians. So let me give you an example. This is a World War II letter. And you have to just understand that it's been verified that it was written in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on an island during World War II. All that's been verified. Now, so this is an eyewitness to the event. Is this a good historical document or a bad historical document? Everybody says good, right? So if I were a historian, I could read this and I could write history and say this happened and that happened based on the knowledge that I got in this letter, because I know that everything in this letter is 100% accurate. Don't I? Because it's an eyewitness, right? And we know, well, in fact, let me just give you a little more background. This was written by my grandfather, actually, to his wife. And we know that husbands never lie to their wives, and so everything in this is true. Can I assume that everything in this letter is true?
No.
No. Are there any other problems that might be with this particular letter on basing history on it? I heard somebody say the word perspective, but I don't know who said that. Who said perspective? Oh, just make it up and raise your hand, because that was a good statement, whoever said it. Does he have limited perspective?
Yes.
Does he know everything that's going on other than what he, in his little realm of the world, can see?
No.
So does that change on whether or not this is a good historical source? Could he be biased? Why and in how?
He was in World War II.
Okay, just being in World War II might make him biased against maybe perhaps the Germans or the Japanese, right? And let's talk about that truth. Like, for example, he might say, "Don't worry about me, honey, everything's fine." Can we believe that? If I do some research and I realize that they were being bombed at the time, why would he say something like that?
Put his wife at ease.
Yeah, right, to put his wife at ease. So we can't take everything for face value in this letter. He might have biases. In fact, the government censors letters coming from war zones. There's certain things you can't say. Imagine if he said in this letter, well, you know, we are setting up our defenses on the north side of the island so that if they come and do a sneak attack, we're ready. I mean, right? You can't write that down. What if it gets in enemy hands? So there's certain things he can't say in it. So we know it's probably censored. We know that he might be lying. And we know he has limited perspective of what really happened. So now let me ask you that original question. Is this a good or a bad historical source for me to base history on? Bad. So I'm just going to throw it away because this is a worthless historical. Okay, it's from my grandfather. I better not do that. It's a copy, you guys. Don't worry. But I will flatten it out. Okay, so I'm not going to throw it away. What do I need to do to be able to use this as a historical source, though?
Compare it to something else.
Compare it to something else. Good. Because if what he says, I see in other documents unrelated to him and unrelated to his documents, I might become to think, okay, maybe that is really true, right? I can't just take one source and believe it at face value. For example, I can look at journals. And by journals, I mean like diaries. Today we blog, but they used to write in a journal or a diary experiences. And in a journal's case, who are you writing for? Yourself, so that you don't forget. And so there'd be no reason to lie. There's no censorship because nobody, is going to see it. So can we take a journal at face value? And if it's a journal, write history basically totally on this? Or are there still problems with it? There's still problems, such as? Still biased. He still has limited perspective. This happens to be a journal by a guy named Ramy, Lejeune Ramy. He was a Civil War soldier. And in it, it's a fascinating read. This has not been published. I read about him not having shoes. I read about them being cold. I read about them being hungry. That seems to be the overall theme. And so if I was going to write a Civil War book and this was my only source, could I say that no soldiers had shoes and they never had enough food? No. I might want to do what? Find another primary source that says a similar thing, right? Substantiate what he's saying. Because I can't take his word for it. Because even though he's not intending anyone else to read this, no reason to say he maybe isn't practicing creative writing, right? Boredom, so it causes him to exaggerate the event. And again, his perspective. He only knows what's going on in his unit. That doesn't say all over the United States during the Civil War the same experience was happening. So we still have to substantiate what a journal says. Another type of document would be court records. We get a lot of history from court records, not just transcripts of trials, but the court keeps all kinds of records, arrest records, and whatnot. So court records, of course, we can take at face value because, especially in the case of transcripts from court, nobody lies in court, so that, of course, is going to be true, right? That was a joke, you guys. A little more laughter would help, especially because I'm being videoed. Yeah, so court records, though. What do we get from court records?
Another perspective.
Okay, another perspective. We get evidence being given to the court that maybe would not be available to us otherwise. We hear interviews from people of a particular event, and we have to treat those court records with a similar scrutiny as we would any other type of primary source, right? Other kinds of government documents would be statistics, death records, birth records, and that type of document is also used. Can you think of another document that we might use to create history? Good. Newspaper. I actually have one here. This is from 1892. It's the Ladies' World. So this is a newspaper, and we know that newspapers are completely unbiased, so this is a perfect source to read to know what's going on in the world in 1892. Okay, you guys obviously don't read newspapers, or you would have understood that was a bait. Yes, newspapers do have their biases as well. And in this one, Ladies' World, what do you think the bias is?
Something towards the ladies.
Right? It's aimed towards the ladies. So are we going to understand what all society experienced based on this? Does it mean we throw it away? No, we laminate it and we show it to our classes, right? And it is a very fascinating read. It tells you what kind of things women were reading. It actually has fictional stories in here. There's great advertisements. There's one that I'm looking for, if I, oh, corsets, if you want to know the current cost of corsets, right there. Well, I'm not able to find it, but it usually has patterns. There you go. How to make lace. Now, if you were to pick up the Fresno Bee, you're probably not going to get these same type of articles. So we can use this as a document to talk about how what is presented to women is different today as it was back then, right? We can look at how much history has changed based on what is going on in the newspapers. Recipes, advertisements, even the advertisements have a historical value. What other type of document would we get history from? Receipts, ledgers from like a hotel. It'll tell you who was there and when. Receipts talk about, you can look at receipts from the Depression War era. And it'll help you to understand what people were buying and what they were paying for it. I have letters from the Depression era of people trying to get their debt to be either postponed, the due dates, or forgiven completely. And so these can be used as documents to understand what people were experiencing during the Great Depression, right? These are war ration books. During the war, your goods were rationed. You had coupons that you used when you bought certain goods. And so we can look at these war ration books and understand based on these what foods were being rationed, right? And then we could dig deeper and try to figure out why those foods were being rationed and how did that affect society? How did people live differently as a result of war rations, right? And so any written document is used to understand history. It's used to write history. It's where we get our facts. But what if documents aren't available? That's where the other items part of the definition, remember it's a diachronic analysis of causality using documents and other items. Sometimes we use other items to analyze history, and this would be a variety of artifacts. We're going to start with artifacts and then move on to other types of other items. So tools, for example. Tools are one of the first things archaeologists look at when they find an archaeological site, because the type of tools used, number one, helps to date that society. Bronze, stone, iron tools. It helps to determine what era, right? But they also tell us what was the focus of that community. We find this city that nobody had found before, and we're digging through it, and we see mostly farming tools. We're going to assume that this was an agricultural society. But if we see mostly military tools, we're going to assume, that they were a warring society. Or if we see weaving tools or grinding tools, the tools that they used tell us a little bit about them. But we can also look at their household items. What is in one's household tells us a lot about how they lived their daily lives. Now, if you thought analyzing documents was difficult in determining what was going on, imagine looking at an object and writing history based on a stone hammer or a pot shard, a broken piece of pottery. And so there are certain problems with using items as well. What kind of items might you find in a household that would tell you a little bit about them? Well, think in your mind, what's in your household? You have art hanging on the wall? Right? Let's start with that. If the household that we're looking at from the ancient eras have a lot of luxury goods, statuary, art and stuff, we know that they're not a subsistence society where they're just barely making it. We realize that this is a society that has means, right? They have more luxury goods. But if it's a household that has nothing but maybe one grinding stone and one cooking pot, grinding stone and cooking pot, well, we know that they're basically just subsisting on day-to-day means, right? Where do you think you'd find, if you find an archaeological site, where would you go to find the most of their household items? Another easy question, you guys. Thank you. I was hoping someone would say in the house, because that's absolutely wrong. Sorry. In reality, when you vacate your premises, you take all the good stuff with you. And where do you put all the rest? The broken stuff, the stuff you don't want anymore? In the trash heap. Finding a trash heap of an ancient society is a treasure trove. You can dig through it and you can see what kind of animal bones, so that tells us what kind of animals they were eating. I set you up for that, don't feel bad. You can see the pottery shards. It tells you based on the type of paint being used, if that was made at this site or is it traded from far away. Anything broken will help understand. And so trash is a great source. Now, if you don't believe me that trash tells you a lot about a society, go through your neighbor's trash when they put their trash can on the curb and dig through it. You're going to be able to tell what they ate for dinner. Oh, they had pizza last week. What bills they owe, if they're on any medications. Now, actually, okay, don't do that. All right. But imagine what we threw away, what it does tell about us. Now you're going to start, shredding all your trash from now on. But trash does tell us a lot about what a society was, what their focus was on. The other item is the architecture itself. And these are not listed in the order that they're found, because usually you see the architectural structures first, and then when you dig in deeper, you find these other items. But the architecture itself tells you, is this a grand society with lots of temples, or is it a basic society with nothing but maybe a circle of mud huts? It tells you if they have a hierarchical society. Do they have a ruling class and a middle class and a laboring class, or is it more egalitarian type society? And so the types of items in their villages or housing developments tell us a lot about the society itself. Now, what if it isn't an ancient society? What if we want to do some more modern research? What kind of other items might we use that's not a written document? Like in analyzing the Civil War. Ooh, looking at the weapons they used during any war, not Vietnam War era, looking at the weapons. Photography, photographs. Once photography was invented, photographs become a very rich historical source to understanding history. Videos, watching JFK's ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country speech, especially knowing the end results of his presidency. It's a wonderful way to try to get a feel rather than just reading it, because you hear his voice, you see him. And so videos, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. If you haven't watched that on video, do so, right? There's these wonderful historical sources on video that can help us to understand history. Artwork also is another document that we use to try to understand a culture. When you see art shifting to a different type of art or a different subject matter, and it seems that many artists are obsessed with a particular type of art, it makes you want to go back and see, well, what was going on at that time that caused this shift? So artwork is one of the other documents. Clothing. I mean, most people don't think of clothing being as a historical source. But you can tell what's going on in society based on the type of clothing they wear, right? Prior to the colonial period, women wore dresses that were very hard to move around in, and when they came over here, they had to work so much harder, they wore more simple styles. Now, to our standards, they were still pretty cumbersome with dresses and slips and bonnets. They still seemed, but compared to what they had been wearing prior, they're very simplified versions of women's clothing. So clothing is even a historical source. So So this is where we get history from. Documents, like the ones I told you, and even some that I can't even imagine, and other items. And what a historian does is they gather all those and they write history.